Next up is Preston Vander. He is a researcher at Circle, where he predominantly works on the ARC blockchain.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Preston Vander. I'm a researcher at Circle. We are launching an L1 blockchain coming up called ARC. And today I'll be talking about a potential network upgrade for multi-proposer, which we have termed AMP, ARC multi-proposer protocol. So as I said, ARC is Circle's upcoming layer 1 blockchain. The goal is to bring some more institutional finance, high speeds, low latency, high throughput, low latency, the whole shebang. And some of the characteristics that we hope to achieve with ARC is this sub-second deterministic finality, which is great marketing. A lot of other people are now using it. Smart contracts with predictable costs, so we'll have USDC as gas, cutting out the variability there. And then the one that we'll talk most about today is consensus. So we are using Malachite, which is a Rust implementation of the Tendermint consensus algorithm. Tendermint has a single rotating proposer, or a single rotating leader, you can think of. And AMP is designed to reduce that constraint and to allow for multiple processes within the network to participate in block construction. Awesome. So there are two different ways that we can motivate having multi-proposers. And also for those who were at SBC, this was the first session on Monday, the whole area around censorship resistance and multi-proposer. So some of this will be duplicated with the talks there. One of them is performance. So blockchains that have their blocks carry full transactions, they suffer from performance bottlenecks where the size of the block and the latency that it takes to propagate that block are competing against one another. So you can think of larger blocks containing more transactions, which is wonderful. However, they take longer to get around the network and for all of the validators to know of these transactions. Whereas conversely, smaller blocks are faster to propagate around the network, but they carry less transactions. And so those two forces compete against one another. The other motivation for having multi-proposers is to reduce the discretion that this leader of consensus has when they propose blocks. So this was mostly talked about on Monday. We have two powers that are given to the leaders of consensus protocols: the ability to include or exclude transactions at will, which leads to potential censorship, and then also reordering, which could potentially lead to harmful MEV. And I put the quote that TradFi loves putting in, which is from the BIS, that transaction reordering at the validator level would be illegal in traditional markets. So those are the motivations around having multi-proposers or multiple proposers participating in consensus. And now I need to introduce two building blocks before we get into ARC's design for this protocol. The first one is vote extensions. So consensus protocols, by and large, they have 3 rounds. The first round is this proposal where the block gets sent around so that people can vote on it, and then 2 rounds of voting. Vote extensions allow validators to attach arbitrary data to the final round of voting, and it will be signed as well. And so these consensus decisions now not only include the votes as they do in every standard protocol, but they also now include the vote extensions. And the signature is important here because if you have a malformed vote extension, then that nullifies your signature as well. So vote extensions are currently used in ARC. They were pioneered in Cosmos, and they're also used in Polygon. And I added this very recently, that Commonware's paper that was put on arXiv last week, titled Multi-Mint, also includes vote extensions now, except they try to be novel, so they call them extending the vote. I think it's hopefully clear to see that vote extensions are very generalizable to other consensus protocols. You just allow people to put more than a single vote into their final round. And then I want to clearly define proposer here because it's slightly different than what many in the room might be familiar with for the term proposer. So proposers participate in constructing blocks. There will be multiple proposers that can participate. They are not necessarily validators, which is a slight difference from Solana's constellation construction. And in fact, we envision applications to be proposers. So you can think of DEXs or lending protocols who want to control their own transaction flow. They can participate as proposers in our network. And we'll see some of the benefits that they would have. Awesome. So I had some designers make this. So here is the AMP protocol, and we'll just walk through it together. So users create transactions, and then users send those transactions to a proposer. So you can imagine that you're trading on a DEX, and then your transactions for your trades go to the proposer for that dedicated DEX. Proposers then bundle all of these transactions together into payloads. The payloads carry the full transaction, and the proposer disseminates the payloads to the validator network. Like I said, it is now the burden of the proposers to disseminate the full transactions to the validator network. For ARC, that's okay, as we won't have many validators to begin with. Validators then attest to the payloads that they have received via vote extensions. So I'm a validator. I see these payloads coming in from the proposers who are disseminating them to me. And then in the final round, in the next consensus instance that I participate in, I have my vote extension that I tell everyone this payload that I now know about. But we don't want to continue propagating the full payload, as that would be far too expensive. And so rather, we just have a very small identifier for each payload. You can think of it as a hash or some other lightweight ID. And then consensus will finalize on the block, and because of these vote extensions, the finalization of this block includes all of the payloads that validators know about. And this creates a wonderful property where the very next proposer, or the block assembler as we call them, in consensus will simply look at the previous finalized block. So if I'm proposing at height, if I'm the block assembler at height h+1, then I look at the finalized block at height h, and I take all of the vote extensions from there, and that is my proposal to the network in my round of consensus. Quite elegant, in my personal opinion, and that block is guaranteed to be next, as you see over there. So just to go over the left-hand side to make sure that we fully follow, users create transactions, they send them over to proposers. Proposers bundle those transactions into payloads. The payloads get sent around the validator network, and then in consensus itself, not a separate process, not a separate format whatsoever, in consensus itself, the validators tell everyone about these payloads that they know about, and then those payloads that get attested to the validators are included in the next block that gets sent around the network. Quite similar to Solana's constellation construction, and if you're curious about the differences, I have an appendix slide on that. So the properties that we get from this construction of AMP are first and foremost bounded inclusion. This is our term for censorship resistance. So the values that get proposed and decided in the consensus process are these sets of attestations, really the sets of vote extensions. And so, as I was saying, at height h+1, the value that gets proposed is going to be the commit certificate of the previously finalized block at height h. And bounded inclusion, therefore, becomes a payload attested by enough validators, in consensus terms n-f validators, gets finalized at height h+1. And that is a guarantee of the protocol. Fixed ordering is our next property. So blocks that get finalized in AMP are composed of payloads, and then we simply require that the ordering of the transactions that are included in these multiple payloads is decided by some deterministic publicly known rule. And I'll throw in a bonus here that this construction decouples dissemination from ordering. This is a known technique to increase throughput, and we're able to eliminate the mempool. The decoupling comes from proposers are now the ones who are disseminating transactions, while the validators purely operate on the payload IDs, those small identifiers for all of the transactions that are included in a payload. Awesome. So I thought I would make a table comparing proposer-builder separation, PBS, from AMP, specifically for this audience and this workshop. So in PBS, users create their transactions. They get picked up by searchers, which get funneled over to a builder, and then the builder gives those transactions over to validators. In AMP, we have the users creating the transactions. They get sent over to a proposer, and then the proposer sends it over to the validator network. The inclusion likelihood, so what I mean by that is I'm a user, I create a transaction. How likely is it to get into a block? In PBS, it's depending on your relative fees. So if your fee is high compared to others, then there is a high likelihood that you will be included into a block. In AMP, we have this guarantee that as long as enough validators have attested to the payload that your transaction is included in, then it will make it into the very next block. The block construction in PBS is decided by the winning builder of the auction that happens for every block, whereas in AMP, we look at the commit certificate of the previously finalized block. And that is really where we get the multi-concurrent proposer from. And then the transaction ordering for PBS is at the discretion of the builder who wins the auction that occurs. And in AMP, as I mentioned last slide, we have this deterministic publicly known rule. You can think of potentially descending priority fee for that, or anything that the entire network knows and will adhere to. Awesome. So there are some open questions for sure. So we don't require proposers to be validators. This is different from some other MCP protocols, and therefore it requires a different threat model. And at the moment, we have an honest proposer assumption built into AMP, but that's not a great assumption. We want to relax that. And so having Byzantine proposers is an open question for our design. Duplicate transactions is another open question. Let's say you have a very latency sensitive transaction. It would be advantageous for you to send that latency sensitive transaction to multiple proposers for the hopes of your transaction being included in a payload that gets attested to as quickly as possible. There is a paper around this on ePrint, censorship resistance versus throughput in multi-proposer protocols, that discusses this exact question. And then finally, incentivizing proposers. I put Pranav's paper up here that he presented on Monday. I'll leave him his talk that's directly after mine to answer all of the questions around this final bullet here. But the idea is we want to motivate apps and others to act as proposers and understand the economics of this new paradigm of protocol better. Wonderful. So the takeaways are AMP is a multi-proposer protocol that is built on top of unmodified consensus for ARC. Could also do it for Cosmos and Polygon. It decouples dissemination from ordering, eliminating the mempool. And we allow the proposers to control their flows. So as we saw, there are no intermediaries that sit between proposers and validators now, which we think will be enticing. And also we have this bounded inclusion property where once payloads get attested to by enough validators, they are guaranteed to be finalized in the very next block. So yeah, with that, I'll take any questions. And if you're interested in more about the dynamics or what it would look like to run a proposer, feel free to see me afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a more like a high-level question. So this is the MEV workshop.
Yes.
How would you expect people to extract MEV in such a system? Do you have any conjectures how the MEV ecosystem would look like in a full
Yeah, totally. I think it will change and adapt. And my best prediction, like I said, we envision apps to run proposers. And so I think the MEV will switch from where it is at the builder level in running the auction at the moment to moving to the proposer level. because now proposers will be able to control their own order flow for their specific application or the users that they are closest to, that like sort of co-locate with them. Yeah. So I think it's going to be a shift, the shift from the current structure where the builder creates the block and gives it over to the validator, who is next as the block assembler, over to the proposer level, where they control their own order flow.
And in the aggregation step, is there any MEV, and how should we think about
No, our vision is to have that deterministic rule, like say descending priority fee, that will set how the block actually is executed after it becomes finalized.
Certainly people would anticipate that, right? And try to be clever about extracting MEV, however you set the ordering rule, right?
Yeah, sure. Like what was stated during the talks on Monday, there's sort of this implicit assumption of unlimited block space. And so, yeah, there would be gaming that happens there as well. Solana's constellation talks about selective censorship resistance, exactly combating this, whereas ours, it's not as clearly thought through at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You had a slide on open questions, and I think the first item was the tolerance of Byzantine proposers.
Yes.
There I would like to understand, as a proposer, do you consider the actual leader of the kind of next round who takes the vote extensions from the previous round, or the parties basically that produce the vote extensions? Like, who can do harm here, and what exactly is the harm? Maybe could you go into that a bit more?
Sure. So I will go back here, actually. So proposers are different than validators. So actually, the two scenarios that you talked about are both at the validator level. And they run, their threat model already includes up to 1/3 of the network being Byzantine, for ARC specifically. So yeah, the validators are the ones who create the vote extensions and are the ones who are the block assemblers proposing the next block that will eventually get finalized. The proposers here are the ones who are directly interacting with the users, collecting their transactions, bundling them into payloads and sending them over to the validators. So let's imagine that you have a transaction you want included, you send it to your nearest proposer, that proposer decides not to put it into a payload. That is the Byzantine actions that I'm talking about, yeah. So that's what we want to avoid.
Got it. So this is all external to the actual underlying consensus protocol. Like the Byzantine issue is more around the proposer itself, who is supposed to be out of the consensus protocol. And the problem is they could censor basically the information that goes to the validators, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Our goal in designing AMP was to not modify consensus at all. And so this was the trade-off in order to have that. Awesome.
I know you mentioned that you have an honest proposer assumption to begin with, but you want to relax that. Do you have an intuition for what a chain reorg and recovery would look like?
Chain org and recovery. Could you expand?
Yeah, so for example, in the case where an invalid block was submitted and not initially discarded.
Oh, sure. Okay, I see. So if a proposer creates a malformed payload, then validators will just ignore it when it gets sent to them. And it will never actually make it onto the chain. Yeah.
All right, let's thank the speaker.